Welcome to Gold Derby. I'm senior editor Denton Davidson, and with me today is a trio from Showtime's limited series, George and Tammy, creator and writer Abe Sylvia, and the star's Oscar winner Jessica Chastain, who plays Tammy Wynette, and Oscar nominee Michael Shannon is George Jones. Great to have the three of you together. And Abe, I'm going to kick it right to you because this is something that you've had for over a decade. And I just want to know what made you so persistent to getting this story told, and why was it so difficult?
Well, I think getting anything made is difficult, but I think it's probably one of the greatest love stories, to come out of the South and to come out of country music. And I was just so intoxicated by Tammy and George's story and their history together. It's for anybody who's interested in doing a deep dive. It is a treasure trove of big emotional events, and their lives were amazing.
And it's fascinating that I hadn't really been told. I mean, why was that? Because it is fascinating.
Well, I mean, in some ways, I think it's who has control of the narrative at any given time. If it's who has rights. Everybody's got, Tammy wrote this wonderful song called Two-Story House, which is a wonderful play on words, where it's like every kind of, it starts, they're singing about a two-story house, but then you realize everybody has their version of the event. So there's two sides to every story. And I think, setting aside like the production logistics and, having enough money to make something well, I think, I think there's control of this particular narrative has been tricky, through the history. Like George has his version of the story, Tammy has her version of the story, and Georgette has her version of the story, and all of their fans have their version of the story. So I think it was our job to sort of distill it down to the essential truth as we saw it.
And Jessica, first of all, congratulations, Golden Globe nomination. So cheers for that. I want to talk about, you've been patient throughout this process as well. What was it like when Abe came to you initially with this project? What were your initial thoughts about that? And what kept you hanging on to this for all of these years and sticking by it?
Yeah, it's actually really interesting because it was Josh Brolin, who's a producer on our show, came up to me at the Golden Globes in 2011 and said, "You should play Tammy Wynette." And I was like, okay. And then, I started reading about her and met Abe, and just his passion for the story is so, infective. And like, I was very excited to read about her. And what kept me going, I think, is I just started to feel really protective of her. She got a bad rap, and she still does, listening to some research and podcasts and people's ideas. I find that I'm fiercely protective of who she was. She was not a doormat. She was not a victim. She was not an opportunist. She was an artist. That song that Abe talked about, Two-Story House, she wrote that song. She was an incredible singular talent. And I felt like I couldn't let anyone but me play her, because I felt like I loved her more than I was going to allow someone else to in terms of her memory.
In the series, she says, "I believe you have to live a song to make it good." And I'm curious, what can we understand about Tammy's life through her music and her voice?
Well, I think that's why actually she is who she is and is the icon she is. Everyone talks about this teardrop she has in her voice. And I think it's more than just a vocal quality. I think it's because she puts everything that she is into her work, into her artistry. It's like diary entries in some sense. I mean, this is a woman who showed up in Nashville, 3 kids, single mom, divorced. When she tried to leave her first husband, her mom took her kids away. She was institutionalized. She had electroshock therapy when she was pregnant with her third. I mean, she shows up at Nashville's door determined to make a name for herself at a time when they're not kind to female musicians, especially one who comes from a broken home in that aspect. And she put everything in the music, and you see it even when she's performing with Jones. There isn't a a barrier. There isn't a wall. She is this open heart. And that's what I found to be so exciting about what she created.
And then it was you who said, this has to be Michael to play George. What made you feel that way?
Well, Mike and I had worked together on Take Shelter in, I think it came out in 2011. I'd been to see his concerts. He's in this band, Corporal, and I know how much he loves music. I know because I worked with him firsthand what an incredible actor he is and how he is on set and how he serves a story and puts everything into it. There's a sense of, I don't know, it's a beautiful focus he has when he's acting, but there's also a great generosity he has on a set, to the story, to the creators, to the other actors around him. He never shows up and takes anything lightly. He's the most dedicated actor I've ever worked with. And so I thought with someone like George Jones, when you're telling that kind of story, you need someone to honor him in that way. And I knew that he was the kind of guy, just the way that I loved Tammy and I was so protective of her, I knew he would be the same with George Jones.
And Michael, you have roots in Kentucky, the Midwest. So did you grow up sort of surrounded in this country culture, or was it a little new for you?
No, I wasn't really. The extent of it really was I used to see Hee Haw on TV sometimes, but we didn't really have music in my house growing up so much. My stepfather had a few records, but they were mostly like classic rock, The Who, Beatles, things like that. But no, I was not steeped in this music at all.
But you didn't hesitate. So what about George Jones intrigued you as an actor and taking just the role of it?
Yeah, it's funny. I wasn't sure about it at first. I had a little bit of trepidation because I think it's such a huge responsibility. I don't take it lightly, and I felt like, well, since I don't know a lot about him, and I didn't go into it as a huge fan, maybe it's not appropriate for me to be doing this. But then I started reading his autobiography, and I just couldn't put it down. It was just one of the most compelling stories I'd ever read, and it's debatable how much of it he actually wrote or how much of it is the actual truth, but nonetheless, I walked away from reading that and thinking, oh, I have to do this. The twists and turns that his life took, and the highs and the lows, and I just never seen a life that had that kind of elasticity to it. I think a lot of the stereotype, the country macho kind of stereotype, I was interested in kind of getting beyond that or underneath it, because I think a lot of people focus on, these guys are tough and they're hard asses or whatever. But I feel like George was an incredibly sensitive person, and he had a lot of big feelings that he had a hard time dealing with. And I always think that that's a intriguing journey to go on.
And there is sensitivity to him. He says something to Tammy. The only reason I'm not dead is because you love me. That's one of the lines in the series. And what do you think it was about Tammy specifically that intrigued him and pulled him towards her? Because he was married. She meets him. He's got another woman in the bed. I mean, it's a very rocky road to their love stories. So what about her pulled him in her direction?
Yeah, well, up until that point, he had been married a couple of times. He had married women that weren't singers or performers, and he would go out on the road, and they would be kind of resentful of that. And there was just a real schism between this domestic life he was trying to create for himself and the art that he wanted to make. But when he met Tammy, I think he really found a kindred soul, because she was every bit his equal as an artist and as a spirit, and they both came from such incredibly rough and tumble beginnings, and they both felt things so deeply. And I think they just realized that in a way they were almost like carbon copies of one another. There obviously were differences of personality and whatnot, but like in the core of who they were, there was a real commonality, I think.
And Abe, you get the go ahead to it's finally time to write this script. Performances are there, archival footage is there, but how do you primarily fill in all of those blanks so we know what's going on behind closed doors? Because you have to come up with that. That's really the root of the story.
Well, these two you could write about any day of their lives, and it would be sort of worthy of filming. So it was a kind of process of essentializing what was most important to the love story. They both lived incredibly interesting lives before they met. They had incredibly interesting lives through the 80s, which we don't cover. But we wanted to just distill it down to that connection of spirit that Michael was talking about, that connection of spirit that you hear when they blend their voices. Like that's like a third thing. It's like you've got George, you've got Tammy, and then you have this thing that they were together, which was its own life force. And that was kind of the guiding principle about what we should include. And so if it didn't pertain to, how is that third essential part of spirit faring within the story, then it fell away. So I encourage people to look deeper into their story, because it's just so fascinating and multi-layered and multi-generational. But for the purposes of the series, it is about the connection between these two people.
And what about speaking with Georgette Jones, their daughter, who wrote the book, The Three of Us Growing Up with Tammy and George? What influence did she have, and what did it mean to have her support of all this? I was at the LA screening and she was there and emotional and very happy. So that has to feel good to have her behind this project.
Gosh, I was so nervous when I knew she was finally watching them. It was just, I couldn't sleep. I knew she had all 6 episodes, and she was the first one to see it outside of sort of the core production team. And, when I got word from one of our producers that she likes it, I called her right away and we both started crying. And I was just so relieved, because she gave us free reign. She really did. She said, don't be shy. My parents weren't perfect people, and they don't have to be perfect. And I think there's sometimes some, people think when like a family member is involved that we're sort of, whitewashing something, but we're not. And Georgette said, my parents were complicated, troubled people, and I loved them deeply. And all of those things can be true at once in our show. And so she introduced us to their friends, to other family members. She was an open book when it comes to her parents. And I'm over the moon that she's proud of it, because there are things in there that aren't in the book, that she chose not to include in the book. And they're there in the series. And it means a lot to me that she believes in it to the degree that she does.
And Jessica, you're on a Tammy train right now. You had Tammy Faye Baker, the role you just won an Oscar for earlier this year. Now Tammy Wynette. This one's a little bit better singer, I have to say. But you voiced both of them. And you said in a previous interview with us that you were a little anxious about the singing. What made you the most anxious? Was it trying to sound like her, or was it the live performing in general that kind of gave you the most angst?
I think it's all of the above. I mean, we also did live performing on Tammy Faye, but not to the extent of this. I mean, we had real session players from Nashville on set with us when we were singing. We had 300 extras, singing Stand By Your Man in Vegas, our Vegas set for 10 hours or however long we did it. It's all live, you know what I mean? It's that was really scary. I think also just the fact that no one sounds like Tammy Wynette when you're singing Stand By Your Man. You could be the most famous, successful country music star, and your cover of Stand By Your Man is not what Tammy Wynette did. And that's the reason she is who she is. So I really had to kind of get over all of those fears and just trust people who this is their specialty. I mean, Ron Browning is our vocal coach, and Mike and I worked with him a lot. He's in Nashville. He works with the greats, Wynonna Judd, and he's the like fixer. He taught Mike and I how to where to place the song, and it's a lot in your nose and things that I had learned. I had done musical theater training, so I had always thought, okay, you take a big breath before you hit a high note, and Ron's like, no, don't breathe. Put it in your nose and don't breathe. And you're like, what? How is this physically possible? But when you have months, that's the great thing about this production. When you have months and months of rehearsing with someone who's reteaching you how to sing in a technique that you're not familiar with, and it actually, you're like, wow, that's actually a nice little thing that works. It helps, him and also bourbon. I'm not going to lie. There was a lot of, there'd be 10 a.m. medicinal tea. I'd be like, please have a medicinal tea. I'm singing Stand By Your Man. And it's like throat coat, with bourbon. And that's what, Tammy's song, Help Me Make It Through the Night. That was like, help me make it through the show. My medicinal tea.
And for anyone who doesn't know, Abe wrote Eyes of Tammy Faye. So the last time I talked to him, he actually had Post-it notes all over the back of his wall about this project, which was funny. So like, Abe, what's your next Tammy role for Jessica, first of all? And what was that like, sort of working on one project and then having this one at the same time? How do you shuffle that?
Well, I've gotten very good at compartmentalizing. In terms of the two projects, Jessica's the most amazing collaborator and a fiercely wonderful producer. Probably the best producer I've ever worked with, and I say that unequivocally.
Abe, I love you.
Like her, just is so in the corner of what's right for the show, and she has such a sense of what needs to happen to make the thing good. And so to have her not only sort of in my corner on story, but in Tammy's corner and George's corner, and she when she says she's protective of them, she means it. And I think the same was true for Tammy Faye, and it shows. But in terms of juggling, you have to throw a lot. It's so funny. You have to, in this business, or like my side of it, you have to throw so much stuff against the wall to make something happen. For every one that hits, you've got 12 ideas that, or 12 babies on the floor, are never going to see the light of day. And I was just very lucky that, like, sort of all at once, these things that I threw up against the wall 10 years ago were all sort of happening at once. I was like, okay, well, it beats the heck out of, walking dogs and QCing at Deluxe, which is what I was doing when I was kind of initially ideating on these two ideas. And so it's like, okay, well, this is your time to be busy, and don't let anybody down. This is your shot. So I think that if anything, just the knowledge that's like, I got incredibly lucky on two things back to back. And I was like, I'm just not going to fail at this. I think that's just kind of what I kept telling myself. And I'm not going to let anything or anybody get in the way of this thing coming out and being the way I want it to be.
And Michael, one of the interesting things about George is that there's so many sides to him. And one of the things that I love is the humor that you bring to the series at times. And one of my favorite scenes is that dinner scene where you're with Don, Tammy's husband at the time, and things are going terribly. And you start singing Tammy's divorce song. And Jessica's face is just, she can't believe what's happening. It's all perfection. But things heat up and you throw the table and all of that. So it goes from comedy to intense fighting in seconds. I'm curious, how
comedy. by the way.
How do you balance that? I mean, it was intense, but it was funny, and the crowd was the crowd loved it
well, that's all like a real story, you know, that's what happened. I guess that's what life's like, you know. It's funny 1 second and something else the next, you know. I mean, it's all just grounded in like really just, I think in that scene it's just grounded in what George wants, you know. He's respectful of the children, he's around children, and he loves children, you know. That's one of the things about George, going back to that sensitivity. He really enjoyed spending time with children and with family, and he can't believe that this man doesn't appreciate what he has, and in that moment where Don's willing to basically let it slip away, George says, well, I'll go ahead and take it then, you know. And but he, you know, he refuses to let him disrespect Tammy and these children anymore, you know, which is very moving to me, you know. Like, it's kind of chivalrous, you know. It's
but Mike, you made the scene exponentially better than what was on. And, you know, he made one slight adjustment, and this is the brilliance of Mike Shannon, that he took it to another level, and he just refused to let Tammy out of the scene. And so on the scripted, the original couplet was, Don says, "You're going to F my wife, aren't you?" And George said, in my script, said, "Yeah, Don, I am." And it was a mistake on my part because it took Tammy's agency. It left Tammy out of the scene. There's two men fighting over a woman. It's like such a basic thing we've seen a million times. And Mike, in the middle of the take, looked at Jessica. She looked back, and then he said, "I sure would like to, Don." And he changed the line on the fly, and it added a layer of tension and humanity and sensitivity to the character. It's like, you want to get the audience. I think it was that thing that keeps the audience on George's side, even as he flips the table, you know, that he isn't this guy like coming in with a gun just saying, "I'm going to save you, little lady." And I think that is part of the George and Tammy ethos, that like he came along, you know, on his horse and swept her up. And it was like, she was fine on her own. She was doing great. They were just a supernova when they were together. And I think, you know, people wanted to make it like this sort of Star is Born story. It's like, no, they were two equals. And I love that Michael, like, you know, we talk about it all the time. It's like sort of the aha moment of that scene is that, and it's just amazing what a change of 3 words shaded differently, I'm just so grateful because I get credit for it.
But also when you're acting, like for me, acting in the scene, that's the great thing about working with someone like Mike is you don't know that that's going to happen. It's the whole, you know, every scene, there's like these little changes, these little improvs, these, you know, behavioral or verbal things that he does. And all of a sudden, the reason why I think that scene is so exciting to watch is it became Tammy's choice. You know, when he says, "I sure would like to," now she gets a say. You know, it's just not like, "Yes, I am." So, but when he did that on the fly, for me to react to it is like, to be a woman and to have a man look at you in a way that they care about your choice and, you know, what you're going to decide, gives it that crackle in the scene. And when you're working with an actor like Mike, I don't even think he plans it. It just happens. I say a little, but he's very tall. He's a magician. He's a big magician.
And he does walk that line, because there is moments of so much respect. And then there's other moments where even in that moment at the very end, he's like, "Let's get out of here. Remind me what kids are yours." Like, it's just sort of like you were just almost there, but then you just had to say the wrong thing.
I know, but it's also so funny because he's just like, so it's like the excitement of what's happening. He's like, "Are we actually doing this?" And I love that it cuts away to babies crying and like the music. And I mean, it really foreshadows the rest of the series when Don says this ain't going to be no fairy tale, you know, and foreshadows a lot of the music that we're about to hear coming up.
Yep.
Can we talk a little bit about people that aren't here right now?
Yeah, please.
Because there's some great things in this series that I think deserve some attention. The production design, the costume design, it really takes you back into that time and into that world. So, you know, where was this filmed? And, you know, how much work went into that? And George's red wallpaper and his big red bathtub and the flashy costumes that we see. Who wants to talk about that and their experience getting into character?
Well, from a design standpoint, we did all of our research. We had hallways full of real photographs of their rooms, and what was amazing was like in every shot of their houses, everything was like right off the showroom floor. Like nothing ever felt kind of lived in, and it was, even though they were wealthy, there was something sparse about each of the rooms, and I just thought that was a really interesting thing to run towards. And in terms of the red bedroom, I mean, that's all from Tammy's autobiography. And, you know, he had that red flock wallpaper and the matadors everywhere. And one thing I found in the photographs that didn't make the show, and I realized it when I was in the research, is when she moved to First Lady, we have a picture of her bedroom at First Lady Acres, and it's the same bed. So she got the bed in the divorce. And that's my one regret, is that we didn't just keep moving that bed from set to set to set. But Jessica has a long-standing relationship with Mitchell Travers, the costume designer.
Yeah, he also did the Eyes of Tammy Faye. I think he's such an incredible costume designer and artist. And he was finding pieces that Tammy actually wore that I got to, wear in this, and, how he was creating the nudie suits for Mike. And he's just so exciting. He cares so much about the whole picture of what's happening. But I was really blown away with all of the design elements. I mean, Abe, you were just talking about the bed. We had a moment where, after Georgette's born, in our series, George reads this poem that he wrote that's on this plaque. And they're the pictures of the bedroom. And after Georgette was born, it's that poem that, Mike reads in our series, with pictures of Tammy, George, and Georgette, and like them all together. And the fact that we were able to recreate so much, it also felt like we were honoring this family.
And John Hillcoat directs. And what's interesting about him is that he's got these deep ties to music. He's directed a ton of music videos. So I'm curious if you think that sort of impacted those performance scenes, and what he brought in his direction to this project.
Absolutely. We also had multiple cameras, which was great. I think when you're performing musical numbers all day, but we have a lot of the songs in their entirety in the show. And so they have to be interesting visually. And having someone like John Hillcoat, who has such experience, not only, making films, I worked with him in Lawless. So I saw firsthand, what the kind of filmmaker he is. And he also has this incredible eye in music videos. So when you have someone who marries those two worlds, telling a story like this, I think that's what helps propel the music forward.
And Abe, how about you? What made you decide on John Hillcoat, or who decided on John Hillcoat?
I don't even remember. I think
Mike, actually.
Yeah.
Mike was like, "Hey, what about John Hillcoat? I just saw him in Australia." And then I was like, "Great, I love John. We worked together, and what an amazing filmmaker."
Yeah, we had been hanging out down in Australia when I was doing 9 Perfect Strangers. I ran into him and his family. Actually, first his wife and his son. There was a little movie theater there that I would go to, and one day I came out of the movies and they were there, and they said, we're living here. And I said, "Oh no, really?" They invited me over for dinner and stuff, and we just talking. And I think it was really important to us to have somebody for all 6 episodes, so that there wasn't a new person showing up, every other day. So, and John was willing to take that on. It's a gargantuan responsibility, and he can handle it. So.
And I just want to shout out quickly to our DP. We talked about the production designer, Jonah Markowitz and Mitchell Travers, and Igor Martinovich has just got such an incredible eye. I mean, when you look at the way those scenes are covered, the camera is always in an unexpected position. It is not big, wide, medium, single, it's being filtered through this point of view. It's like, so it feels very much observed and captured. And so you're just kind of capturing these moments of life. And he always talked about how in even the darkest moments in the show, there was just a little pin spot of hope. So it's really, there's a beautiful scene in episode 5 after something terrible has happened to Tammy, and she goes and she takes comfort by laying down with her daughter. And it's the most beautiful shot. And it's a dark time for Tammy. She's taking comfort, and there's this sliver of light that cuts through. And it's just like those little touches, to have somebody like him thinking about how the light is going to play on these moments. It's there's 2 moments where we capture these big fat tears of Michael and Jessica's that come unexpectedly, and the camera's catching, the light's catching it. I mean, I just was really blown away by his work.
And can someone talk about Pat Healy? Because
it's our favorite subject.
This poor guy is like, he's the least likable character. I mean, he's the villain of this. But if he's not pulling that off, the audience isn't feeling it. So, what was that like to go toe to toe with him on set? And what was that interaction like? Do you sort of stay at a distance when you're trying to have tension with another actor like that, or what was it like?
Well, I've known Pat for years and years. I started out doing theater in Chicago, and so did he. And I think I've known him almost 30 years. I call him Patches. So we're old buddies. We did plays in Chicago, and he's such a sweet guy, and it's funny that he's got this reputation for playing, kind of nasty people. But he really saved our bacon, because we didn't have that part cast till we were really scratching our heads about it. And I mean, I wasn't the casting director or anything, but one day I said, well, damn, just let me see a picture of Don Chappell. Let me see this guy. And I looked at the picture and I said, oh, that's Pat Healy. That looks just like Pat Healy. And Abe's like, Pat Healy? Jesus, why didn't I think of that before? And so we, Abe, the cast of people got on the phone with them and got him in there. But
I think it was like 2 days before he shot. Like we didn't have a Don like 2 days before. And it was, he just swooped in and saved the day, and just, he's such a delicious actor that, like, even as it's like my favorite kind of performance when someone is playing the heel or the villain. It's like, but it's so delicious and fun to watch them. And yet he's not making fun of the guy. And that's such a tricky needle to thread, that it's like the performance is wildly entertaining and still really truthful. And that's just a real testament to his skill.
And Jessica, for you, Tammy goes through a lot of difficult stuff, but there's also some fun moments. What were the most fun moments for you, or things like working with the other female singers on Girls' Night, and some of the more fun moments?
On Girls' Night? What do you mean?
Well, I mean, just like what was the most fun for you, just working with all of these other singers on stage?
Oh my gosh. The most fun working with singers. I mean, the singing always felt tense to me. I guess the most fun would be the harmonies. In some sense, that was really fun. Or like our rehearsals were really fun. We'd have on the weekend, we'd all get together with the musicians and we go through the work we have for the week. It was pretty intense. Once we were on set, it was really focused. So a lot of like the fun memories I have is I remember there was a bouncy castle outside and I actually got Mike Shannon into a bouncy castle, and there's video to prove it, jumping around before we had to go like do some like serious acting. So it was an incredible group of people, you know, wonderful musicians, wonderful other actors, Steve Zahn, Walt, Kelly. I mean, the cast was, it's just so fantastic. Ron Browning, our vocal coach, Rachel Moore, who this makes me really excited because it's her first thing coming on as like this music producer. She's worked with T-Bone Burnett for such a long time. And now she gets all this, like she's standing out. She was with us every day on set, recording all the vocals. It was an amazing group of people. And it's very rare that you have so much fun working with a group and that feels also artistically stimulating. And then you're proud of the show. So for me, it kind of like hit all the boxes, and that's a very rare thing in a career to have a moment like that.
And is this video in the bouncy house on YouTube, or is that?
No, but it will be someday. I'm holding it over his head, man. I got him, but the way he bounces too, he doesn't really, his feet don't really leave the bouncy house. He just kind of goes like this. And then I got him sliding down the slide head first. What?
I got up in the air a little bit.
Probably because I was like bouncing really hard on the other side and like launching you into the air.
Yeah, probably.
Well, just as a final question to all of you, you know, what do you want people to take away from this series, and what do you hope people see and celebrate with the legacy of George and Tammy?
I want people to like pay more attention. I mean, listen, George and Tammy, yes, they are celebrated as, you know, the icons that they were, but you know, I watched the Ken Burns documentary and I was really sad that they're only in 10 minutes of that documentary. I watched all 8 hours. You know, you can stand by someone, you can forgive them, and if the relationship isn't healthy, you can decide, you know, to divorce, but it doesn't mean you're leaving them behind. She stood by George Jones her whole life. He was struggling. She took him on tour with her. She always loved him. And I think there's been a lot of mixed messages with that song. So I kind of want to remind people actually of what the words are. Tammy was not a doormat. She was not a victim. And she was an incredible artist and human being. And so that's what I hope people come to it. Maybe they think, you know, maybe we bring new people to this genre of music that didn't know that they'd like it so much.
All right. Well, it's so exciting to have this celebration of George Jones and Tammy Wynette told through this series, and everyone can check it out on Showtime. Abe, Jessica, Michael, thank you all for getting together to discuss George and Tammy with me today.
You're welcome.
Thanks. Bye. Nice to see you.